Greetings, everyone, from a sunny Budapest. In the wake of this coronavirus pandemic, it has certainly become fashionable to reimagine higher education. People want to know what the daily experience will be like for students, for teachers in the next academic year or semester.
The COVID-19 crisis will change everything, including the education system.
Prepare for 100% distance learning. Students also need to know how to learn online.
I think we have an extraordinary opportunity. This is a historical moment we're in.
The big challenge, what I think is ahead of us, is how to reinforce critical thinking that is required for creative solutions.
We're in the world of planetization.
It is not fair for the teachers when these two terms, online learning and emergency remote teaching, when these two terms are used interchangeably. We need to start thinking about how not to go back.
I see there's a lot of unfamiliar names, and if the registration list is anything to go by, it probably means that I have not met many of you. So just a brief introduction. My name is Craig Johnson. I am the co-founder of Global Institute for Lifelong Empowerment. And I think just to set the scene up, I thought I would explain exactly what it is that our foundation is getting up to here in Budapest. That way you can connect the dots and see how this webinar and future webinars actually fit in. So firstly, you should know that our foundation's vision is to nurture wisdom and maintain relevance in the digital age. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that. Our vision is to nurture wisdom and maintain relevance in the digital age. So it takes effort, for institutions to keep up with technological disruptions, let alone pandemic disruptions. And we really need to think about what actions we can take today so that we can remain relevant in society tomorrow. It's important that our learning environments are fit for purpose for the 21st century. And I think it's also crucial that we develop the kinds of skills that will suit a future workplace that's essentially going to be dominated by automation, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. So that's exactly what we're up to, and that's why our intervention exists. We try to develop students' interpersonal skills so that they can future-proof their career. So interpersonal skills, I'm talking about soft skills. Sometimes it's packaged as social intelligence or even human-centric skills. Yeah, the skills that robots will not be able to do in the future. So besides this, we also have a scientific journal that is on skills development. And we also share lots of content through website articles and podcast interviews. Right, but today we actually want to cover a lot of ground. In the wake of this coronavirus pandemic, it has certainly become fashionable to reimagine higher education. But what exactly are the issues? People want to know what the daily experience will be like for students, for teachers in the next academic year or semester. Will it be more online learning? Will it be blended learning? And how can one make the most of such a situation? Will the quality of the education drop? How do we manage the digital divide, digital distractions, be it in the classroom or elsewhere? We really want to try cover all these aspects from both a student's perspective as well as the teacher's perspective. It is my job to be the moderator in this webinar today, and I'm actually going to try and extract some meaningful insights from our experts today. But I really need your help, guys. So as we progress through this session, please tell us what you think about a particular topic. If there's anything noodling up there, then please just drop it in the chat box or even in the Q&A, and we'll be able to see it. And then I will then try my best to integrate it into the conversation. Otherwise, our guests will just respond to you guys directly. So yes, so we have a great panel of speakers today, nice and diverse in terms of their background and experience, but also diverse because they come from different geographic locations, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So András is a professor at the National University of Public Service in Hungary. He was the former rector of UNESCO's Institute for Water Education, and he is also a board member at our foundation. Andras, welcome.
Thank you.
Sofia Mavridi is a lecturer, teacher trainer, researcher, and a digital learning specialist at De Montfort University in the UK. Sophia is also a member of our editorial board for our scientific journal. Sophia, welcome.
Hello. Thank you, everybody.
And finally, Lon Appleby is a general education professor in the School of Interdisciplinary Studies at Durham College. If you're wondering where that is, that's in Oshawa in Canada. Lon is also the founder of the Global Class Initiative, which is a live stream class about humanity and the planet, where students engage in real time in thought-provoking discussions. So Lon, welcome.
Hi, everyone.
I reckon just to kick things off, perhaps we can just do one round and you guys can just share your input on how you view the future of education. I think we'll start with you, Andras, and then we'll move on to Sophia and then Lon.
Well, the short sentence is that the COVID-19 crisis will change everything, including the education system. It probably will, again, emphasize the importance of recognizing globalization, recognizing that alone, independently from one another, we cannot deal with the complex issues what we have, particularly in the light of 9 billion human beings that will populate the earth in 30 years. With all the crises that we have, running out of water, polluting the environment, changing climate, land degradation, the whole environmental thing. And that will probably change. And probably we will move towards a blended education. Probably we will go beyond that debate whether digital technology is just a luxury of a few. Probably we will have to empower the developing countries in order to be part of the global debate on this.
Okay. Sophia, you share the same view?
Yes. I think I can't look very far ahead into the future because unless a vaccine is found and tested, higher education and schools in general cannot simply go back to how things were before COVID-19. But I think that the lockdown challenged our norms. So whatever happens, even if a vaccine is found tomorrow, we should not just go back to how things were. In fact, I think we need to start thinking about how not to go back to how things were before COVID-19, but how we can move forward.
Lon?
I'd actually like to just build a little bit on what Sophia said and just take it a little bit further, perhaps into the future, a little bit more philosophical, if you will, and say that I think we have an extraordinary opportunity. This is a historical moment we're in, and I think it's time that we go further with globalization now and recognize that we're in the world of planetization. We all, every one of us, must become better planetary thinkers on this planet in order for us to solve the problems that we have that are affecting all of us now globally and locally, and also to enrich our lives and create new opportunities. And I think it's essential that we as educators now look at how technology is being used through this crisis and take it further. Do not be afraid when this is all over to go forwards, not backwards.
Fantastic. Thanks for those opening remarks. Everyone connected onto the webinar would have seen I've just launched a poll. We just want to get a feel for our audience, so that we can tailor our message depending on where you're coming from. So please do vote. So I think going forward, what I would like to do is just to frame the discussion to first look at the transition and how that happened and how universities manage that. And then we can take the future perspective and then see how or what we can expect, what students and teachers can expect, and how we can make the best of that situation, be it blended learning, online learning, or whichever. So I want to come back to you, Andras, and having served in UNESCO for over 25 years, perhaps you can provide us with an institutional perspective when it comes to how universities adapted to the pandemic situation, both locally and globally.
Well, first of all, they closed down. And then for about a month or so, they didn't know what to do. And then technology came in, and for those who were familiar with the digital technologies, it was, relatively easy. But there are many more who were not really equipped with this. On the other hand, I would like to stress one point. If somebody says that technology is the answer, then I would like to ask a question. What was the question to which this is the answer? Technology is a part of the answer. I think what is ahead of us is a huge challenge, is to retool our whole higher education system into a much more transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary, if you wish, approach. And instead of this I-shaped knowledge that we have a mechanical engineer, civil engineer, a sociologist, an anthropologist, to have an interdisciplinary education system whereby an engineer has a certain amount of sociology or cultural anthropology and vice versa, in order to enable that we could put together this T-shaped profile, that we can design teams to solve problems, an engineer, a mathematician, a physicist, a geographer, who could talk to one another. And of course, digital technology is a wonderful thing. However, we shouldn't perhaps forget about the basis of digital technologies, which is, whether you like it or not, is mathematics. So perhaps out from the elementary school, we have to somehow improve the level of mathematical education. Most of the students are afraid of mathematics, while on the other hand, I think mathematics is a great fun. So how can we teach not numbers but relations, whether you talk about society or you talk about an engineering system? The big challenge, what I think is ahead of us, is how to reinforce, or rather start with the new education systems, the recognition of critical thinking. That's the most important thing. Critical thinking that is required for creative solutions. How to prepare the next generation of experts and leaders to communicate with one another, and how to work in groups. How to recognize diversity. Yes. So there are so many problems that I think will force us to reconsider how universities work. Yes, and one more, if I may, Craig, says that a university is a place where universal knowledge is, and that's what we should really build upon and look at it again. What they are for? Are they just a teaching factory, or are they just a research factory, or how do you blend these two things together? So that's a big challenge, I think, for most of the university leaders.
Yes, Andras, thanks. I actually want to push back a little bit, because I think, the writings have been on the wall for a very long time. And a lot of what you said has been said in the past. But for the life of me, I cannot understand why it has taken universities so long to really adapt to the 21st century, at least relative to many of the other industries and sectors in society. From an institutional perspective, and perhaps you can give us a quick, brief answer, why the stubbornness on the part of the institutions, or is there another reason? Why did they take so long to adapt?
Well, I don't think it's the stubbornness, it's a different culture. For instance, the North American university culture does differ a great deal from the European. The European is still more education-oriented than research-oriented. But before the Bologna system, which basically took over the North American or the British education philosophy, we had a very Prussian type of doing or running universities. While in the US, most of the universities are research universities, where professors are writing all the time, one proposal after the other. Now, how can we blend the two things? And this three-level training, the bachelor's, master's, and PhD, I think that can fit very well into the needs of the society.
Okay, okay. Sophia, I want to bring you in here, and I want to go back to the transition, right?
Mm.
So all around the world, universities scrambled around to essentially move everything online, and there was a lot of what they call emergency remote learning. Do you want to just? I know you do a lot of you're a digital specialist trainer, and you do a lot of this online learning versus remote learning. Perhaps you can begin by explaining the difference between the two.
Thank you very much for this question, as it is important to make the distinction. So I'm very, very happy to answer this question, really, because I think it is not fair for the teachers when these two terms, online learning and emergency remote teaching, when these two terms are used interchangeably. It is not fair. So online courses, as we know them, for us e-learning specialists, are developed by a team of experts, academics, instructional designers, educational technologists. So this team will develop the online course in a systematic way. They will test it, they will review it, they will develop it according to principles on how people learn online. And so they will integrate all these necessary features to facilitate learning in this online mode. Instructional designers are very important here. Emergency remote teaching, on the other hand, is a response to a crisis, really. And I should say that given the circumstances, the very, very difficult circumstances, teachers and institutions and leaders and managers did exceptionally well, because they were forced to dive in uncharted waters. Most of them had never taught online before, so they were kind of forced to step out of their comfort zones. And they didn't have proper training because there was no time for this. So to me, educators are exceptional people, and they managed to switch to remote teaching overnight. So it would be unfair on teachers to make any comparison between what they have been asked to do and online education as we know it, which is a pedagogically sound approach that has a very valuable resource too, time and expertise.
Yes, I actually just want to follow up there because I know you do a lot of research with regards to teacher training as well. And maybe you can share some of your findings with regards to the general attitudes that teachers have towards these teacher trainings, because, you know, the move or the shift to the online platform is nothing new. You know, so they could have, and many people don't realize, but it was a scramble for teachers to quickly figure out how the whole online platforms work. All of that could have been achieved years back before. So I don't know if that's connected to not taking it seriously, the whole digitalization of higher education. Perhaps you can comment on their general attitudes towards the whole upskilling, reskilling in higher education.
Yeah, I think that educators are lifelong learners anyway, and by nature they love training, they love growing. Perhaps they didn't realize that, you know, technology, that they should engage in training anyway. But let me tell you a little bit about my research, and this may answer your question. So my current research is I'm researching language educators' experiences moving online. So around 1,150 educators took the survey, so I'm very happy about the number. And more than 80% of them had never taught online before. And yeah, only 7% received substantial training via their institution. because there was no time for anything else. So we can't blame the institution at this time. 16%, 1/6, didn't receive any training at all, and 55% organized their training by themselves via free webinars and publications offered online, and via colleagues, because they were asking colleagues for help on social media. You know, teacher communities are really strong online. So if you post a question, for example, on Twitter or on Facebook, how can I do this? How can I do that? You get lots of support. So this is fantastic. It's fantastic to see this generous support within our community, and also amazing to see how teachers, I mean, they organized all this by themselves when they had to. I'm not suggesting that technology was not important or essential before, but let's face it, if we are used to doing things in our way, maybe we need some push. And this push was this lockdown. So, and they did it. So I don't know if I answered your question. I'm not saying that this training, that we can rely on this training. This is peer training. If we can give it the term, we can call it emergency remote training, then yes, we can call it emergency remote training or peer training, which is valuable. I'm a big advocate of teacher communities and student communities and communities of practice, but we cannot rely on that. So teacher training is a key consideration for leaders from now on, because teachers need support.
Yes, yes. Couldn't agree with you less. Actually, I think it's high time we bring you in here, Lon. For the ones who just joined us and missed the introduction. So, Lon, you're a professor at Durham College.
Yes.
And you also the founder of the Global Class, which is a live streamed class with students around the world engaging in real time in a particular topic that concerns humanity and the planet. So you've been doing this digitalization thing for several years now. And then the pandemic came and essentially everyone sort of jumped on your bandwagon. I imagine, is it fair to say that the transition has been smooth for you, seeing that you've invested heavily in technology at your college and you embraced it a while back?
Thanks, Craig. Yes, it has been quite smooth because we had built an infrastructure at the college, including a new classroom as well, and then the whole online dimension. So yes, but I think that when we look ahead and we try to understand where we're going, where humanity is going in this moment, I would like to just make sure I understood a figure that Sophia gave, because this is important. The 65%, was that what you said? 65% have been organizing their own initiatives, and they're the ones
55.
who needed a little, sorry?
55.
55, okay, good. That's still around what I thought. Before I just explain that and about what I see as the opportunity, Craig, for all of us to emerge from this moment in a new place, in a better place, I would just like to say too, there are several students or several participants who have sent comments on the Q&A, and I'm going to try and address those points through the conversation, but I'm going to try and stay present with all of you and not get too distracted by the Q&A, but I will come to those later, okay? So for those of you, keep sending points in on the Q&A. That's great. I think that we actually have to go a little bit further now and even question what is higher education. Now, traditionally, we thought of a classroom as a place where people gather in 3 dimensions and they have a class. It's a place. I think higher education is not a place, it's a state of mind. It's an idea. We can now, with the technologies that we're using better and better, create our own classrooms. We can teach one another. We can learn from one another. Every single person now on this planet, if they have access to fairly minimal technology, has a chance to be introduced to another person. And I think that in this time, we need to reflect on whether we're ready to go further now and take education in our own hands, to be more empowered about what we can do with our own education. That doesn't mean we don't need our teachers and our experts and our authorities and all the experienced thinkers, global thinkers and doers and scholars. But it does mean that we have this great new force that we're all using better and better, and that is the technology to connect and learn together. And I think we have to ask ourselves, are we ready to go there? Or are we going to continue to think of higher education as a place that you go to and you get a degree, you know, you're in a classroom, and the technology part and all this other part that we're doing now is just something extra? It's not extra. It's something new and essential for us to use.
Okay.
And it's up to us, Craig. It really is. It's up to us, to individuals, not our professors, not our authorities, but us.
Yes, yes, yes. Thanks for that, Lon. I think your comments are a nice segue into the next poll question that I actually want to ask people. So there is a lot of pros and cons whether you go online, blended, face-to-face learning, and there are some restrictions by going all online, which is what sort of Lon is alluding to, because it does create that barrier, not barrier, but it makes it a bit of a challenge to develop things like social skills and interpersonal skills when everything has moved online, for example. So please spare a moment and answer. We're curious as to your thoughts in the poll. And I think at this stage, I would like to come to you, Sophia, with regards to the technology. So you've heard from Lon to say that we need to embrace technology a lot more. But it seems to me that embracing technology more in the classroom, be it with the use of laptops, with the use of cell phones, or even updating digital learning methodologies is how it's typically packaged. How does that get managed? Digital distractions are known to be a distraction in the classroom, or can it be managed? This is sort of your background. Could you comment on that?
So I've been working on this topic for quite some time now, and I have challenged the reactive approaches that many institutions adopted before COVID-19 in physical classrooms, which basically were to ban devices from the classroom. And my point was back then, and that was not a long time ago, six months ago, for example, my point was that if you ban the devices from the classroom, then you deal with the symptom, not with the problem, because technology is distracting, and because FOMO is very real and it's here to stay. FOMO, for those of you who haven't heard the term, stands for fear of missing out. So this is a form of anxiety that forces you to use your mobile device in a compulsive way, really, and check it every 2 or 5 minutes. So that's real, we can't deny it. So banning devices from the classroom deprives students of the opportunity to develop this skill to manage their distractions everywhere, not in the classroom, at home, in the work environment, in the future. And here we are, teaching online with students that are surrounded by digital distractions, and now we cannot ban the devices. So I think that we need to rethink about the purpose of education, really. I think Lon said that earlier. A degree is not just about developing subject-specific skills, it's also about being able to function and thrive in the real world, physical or digital. So that's why managing digital disruptions, as well as other transferable 21st century skills, need to be embedded in our curricula.
Yes, yes, yes. Andras, I would like to turn to you with embracing of all this technology. You were at UNESCO for many years, and I know that you're focused a lot on developing countries. So if there's anyone that's deeply familiar with education poverty, it's definitely you. As a result of the pandemic, it's obviously become a lot worse, as there's been many marginalized groups that have essentially been locked out of the so-called digital classroom. You see it in many countries around the world. So my question to you is, what can higher education institutions do to address this digital divide in education? And if you can give practical or concrete examples, that will help.
Right. I think one needs to make a distinction here up front. I don't see any particular problem looming in the case of the so-called industrialized countries. They have the capacity, they have the technology, they have the education institutions. All they have to do is to start massive teacher training programs that everybody would become digitally literate. The problem, however, is happening with the developing countries, particularly in Africa. The digital technologies have progressed a great deal in Africa as well, basically because of banking. Some of the big banks wanted to get more money out of Africa than to have money flowing into Africa. So they developed a fairly good system. However, hardware. However, the software or the manware or humanware is missing. I think that's where the industrialized countries have a great deal of responsibility to help them through student exchange programs, by sending teachers to overcome the digital divide, but above all, to have the hardware available because of, again, the poverty situation. They simply can't do that. They can't buy a laptop. So we somehow, I think we need to develop if I can use Lon's wording, a planetary system, if you wish, on going beyond the hardware divide and going beyond the education divide. And my experience with working with Africans was entirely positive. I had a couple of students coming from certain parts of Africa, and they were absolutely brilliant in their mathematical way of thinking. So talent is uniformly distributed. All what we have is the responsibility to bring that talent out. So poverty here is a big issue. Unfortunately, as what happens in the north is that university education is getting more and more expensive. Those training programs and scholarship programs which were available in the 60s and 70s, and the African leaders today are a product of those programs. They pretty much dried up. So what we need really to do is to, first of all, to go over the financial divide and have the developing countries to help themselves.
Okay, Sophia, you wanna comment on that?
Yeah, so Lalia, I don't know if I pronounced the name well. She says the poverty also here in the UK, and I would like to confirm that. I totally agree with Andras that there is digital divide, of course, and we need first of all to look at the financial divide, and then this will be bridged somehow. But I think that we also need to say that the digital divide is becoming wider now because of the COVID-19, that everybody is online. And these digital divides are not only between low connectivity and high connectivity countries. There are divides among our students in Europe, in the UK definitely, where I am, and in the USA and Canada. And it may not depend on us to fix at the moment. We can't make the internet faster for them or give laptops to all our students, although the institution where I worked, to a certain extent, they try to accommodate, and give some laptops, but we cannot rely on that, or we cannot expect that every institution will be able to do this. But there are certain things that we can do on a micro level. So from my perspective, as a digital learning specialist, as a person who designed courses, we cannot assume that all our students have proper internet and devices to be online, even if we teach in Europe or Canada or the UK. So 25% of our students may not have fast internet connection or a personal computer or a fast computer. They might be sharing the computer, for example, with a sibling, or they might have only one computer. This doesn't make, there is digital divide there as well, because there are significant implications for learning. And some of them use their mobile devices to attend live lessons. So that's why I said that this pandemic and this switch to online teaching aggravated, widened the digital divide. Because attending a live class on a tiny screen and following the chat box at the same time comes with limitations. So we need to take into consideration when we design our courses and our materials and find other ways, perhaps asynchronous ways, to accommodate these students.
Okay, thanks for that, Sophia. And we were speaking the whole time about the transition, from an institutional perspective, from, the problems that arise there. And you actually now moving us nicely to, the forward perspective. And I actually want to stick with you for a little bit longer. So I'm just looking at the poll results, which I have shared with everyone. When it comes to the next academic semester or year, it's clear that there is... The votes were in favor of 70% online, 30% traditional, face-to-face. And that seems to make sense, because I know in the UK, there's some large universities such as Cambridge that took the decision to stick with online learning. And when it was face-to-face, it would be in small focus groups. So my question that I do want to raise to you, Sophia, is that how do, and I would like you to answer it from a teacher's perspective as well as students. So presumably there will be a blended learning situation. How can one make the most of that? Because there is all sorts of problems. You talked about the screen in the chat and the limitations that come with that from a teacher's perspective, but there's also students that are tired or lack that in-person social interaction. There's teachers being overworked. So the question is, how can we make that transition from emergency remote learning to proper online learning and still achieve quality education?
Okay, so the transition. I would say that I think, first of all, we need to mention perhaps why we need to bridge the gap. And we need to say that emergency remote teaching may have been a very, very good solution over the first phase of the pandemic, but it is not sustainable. It is not sustainable, and it would be wrong to establish it as the new paradigm, because it basically replicated, mirrored face-to-face pedagogies and methodologies onto an online environment. And because there was no time for anything else. So people did what they knew only online. And this is why the synchronous mode was the predominant mode, and the asynchronous mode was materials that were for classroom use. So to bridge the two, we need to redesign the learning experience according to how people learn online. And we need proper teacher training, not emergency remote training, proper teacher training. There are no shortcuts or magic solutions. We need to redesign the learning experience. So if I may add here that for the institutions that will be ahead of the game will be the institutions that will realize that there needs to be proactive, and they will try to prepare for a full year of 100% quality distance learning from September onwards. So these institutions will be ahead of the game. So prepare, this is what I would say, and this is what I consult. So prepare for 100% distance learning. And if the good case scenario wins and we manage to get students into the physical classroom, then you can still use these materials in a face-to-face setting and flip the classroom and blend the classroom and get students to do asynchronous work at home and use the physical classroom for projects and interaction.
Right, Lon, do you agree with that insight? I mean, arguably you guys were ahead of the game because you had embraced technology more than many institutions. Would you agree with those comments from Sophia?
Yes, but as always, I would like to take things a little bit further, in terms of trying to see where we may be. I am very encouraged, though, by a statistic that you gave from the poll that 70% of the 100 or so people who are online right now and who have all gone to the poll have concluded that the online part of higher education is needed. Well, as a matter of fact, imagine in a previous plague, for example, a previous pandemic, and humanity has been filled with them from, smallpox and polio, measles and mumps. Historically, we didn't have technology to connect us during these plagues. When we went into quarantine, when Isaac Newton or William Shakespeare was in quarantine in the 1500s in London, they couldn't connect like this. They were alone. And they believed that somehow God had made this terrible thing happen. We now are smarter. We now understand that science and problem solving and humans coming together to solve problems can actually create a better world. And all countries now are waiting for a vaccine. Isn't it a remarkable thing all around the world now that nobody is turning to other forms of sort of problem solving? Now we are looking to science. What that means is that the minds of humanity right now can continue to come together, and 70% of us are not afraid of the technology that we're using. The fear of technology is in the institutions still, in old, complacent, backward academic institutions that still see themselves as providing credentials in an old format. And it's the institutions themselves, right at the senior level, that have to recognize that they need to do more to provide faculty and educators with assistance. For example, in the global class, we've developed a model where we have a global class assistant. She's online right now with us, Cassandra White, a student who's graduated from our college, and her job is to work with every individual faculty member at the college to help them globalize their classroom, to help the faculty connect with other students and institutions around the world, to do technical testing with them, to make sure that when people are connected, the light is on their face. If they need bandwidth in some less developed parts of the world, we have many partners in less developed countries, then perhaps we can help provide some financial assistance with some extra bandwidth, perhaps help them purchase a webcam. It's not expensive, technology is getting cheaper. We as educators have to care. We as leaders have to care. And once we care, we can make things happen.
Yes, I see there's quite a few comments here about whose responsibility it is to deal with things like the digital divide, with dealing with the online, the teacher trainings, the political will within education institutions.
It has
Maybe
to
I
be
can.
greatly improved, Craig. Craig, you know, it has to be greatly all around the world in institutions to recognize now that faculty and educators, if they're going to provide students with the right tools, they need some help in training. They need some help in implementation of the technologies. They need a unit based in their institutions whose only job is to work with educators on a full-time basis to get them connected, and not in an amateurish way, in the way that you have done it, Craig, how well planned you've done it, how we're using the tech, we're all sitting in the right way, we're all using proper microphones. You know, we've got to get universities and higher education out of the amateurish use of technology.
Andras, I want to bring you in there. Do you agree with the sentiment that Lon has also made? And I think as a second question, which you could also answer, is the impact on international student mobility. Perhaps you can comment on that as well, because I see it's in the questions.
But to start with, let me just start with the second one. I think that's a key importance in this whole issue. European Union, perhaps one of the most successful programs the Union had was the Erasmus, the student exchange program, because that helped build up social cohesion amongst students coming from different nations. I fully agree with him, particularly the importance of knowledge and sciences, not only natural science but also social sciences. And even I would go as far as saying that unless we built up knowledge-based societies in the 21st century, there will be no society unless we have societies that are knowledge-based. And then the sine qua non there is to use the digital technology. That was a question, one of the participants asked the question that, will artificial intelligence replace teachers? Well, I guess you must have been my student, because some of the students proposed me that I should get lost and then have artificial intelligence taking over. I don't think so. But I hope it will not be the case, because the person-to-person relation in a classroom, I think it's still very important, because that will give you the human touch. Some say that, well, artificial intelligence can do the same thing, but I doubt it. So it is very important to keep the human relation, as even if you have the blended sort of learning system. The key to the whole thing, and I think Sophia has mentioned that, is the political will. The political will, not only by the educational institutions, the political will by the governments, in order to create an enabling environment, again with due consideration to the needs of the developing countries and the environment. We will have tremendous challenges ahead of us. You know, in 30 years, there will be 9 billion human beings around the world. And we see that we have depleted the resources. In certain areas, we are beyond the point of no return. For instance, when it comes to climate change, and there are still climate change deniers, that's a big challenge. Our water resources are diminishing. 5 more years and we will step over that line of no return. Biodiversity losses are now beyond the point of no return. So if you would really like to deal with these issues upon which the survival of humanity depends, then you need an educated society. You need mass education. Therefore, one of the issues I think we have to address is the financing of higher education, which lately became prohibitively expensive. Again, who are losing? The poor.
Yes, no, thanks. And I couldn't agree with you more. And I mean, even in the UK where Sophia is at, I know there is a lot of movement with students demanding partial refunds because it's either too expensive as well as they are being deprived of the full university experience. That's a topic definitely to explore in a separate webinar. What I do, because I see we are running out of time, what I do want to do is go back to you, Sophia, and ask you, what sort of advice would you give to students to better cope with blended learning situations? For a lot of them, it's been completely new, and the reality is that this pandemic is going to linger around a lot longer. So in terms of making the most of an uncontrollable situation for them, what sort of advice would you typically give them, whether it's just digital distractions, but also beyond that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not just digital distractions. And what I would like to say here is that we have focused, thank you for the question, because we have focused so much on what teachers can do and what teachers know and don't know about teaching online. And we forget that students also need to know how to learn online because yes, students, the ones who are younger, of course, they are digitally fluent and they actually live online. They have their communities and they create videos and they use filters very professionally. But when it comes to learning and cognitive skills, then they do need a new set of literacies as well. So students need to learn how to learn online when it comes to digital environment. And I wouldn't like to say that it is the students' responsibility right now to learn how to learn. To me, it is the teachers and the institutions' responsibility to teach them how to learn, to promote self-directed learning. So this is why I said earlier that we should not go back to where we were, but we should try to move forward and focus more on self-directed learning and independent learning. And of course, one of the things is managing digital distractions. You simply cannot study or learn online if you are bombarded by notifications and you are distracted and you cannot manage this. So, but I would say that we need to make students feel that they are part of the solution, not part of the problem. You can manage your distractions. No. So research suggests that it is a myth to think that students are not concerned about the digital distractions. They simply don't know how to handle them. So there are various techniques, self-regulation techniques, but there is no one-size-fits-all solution, of course. But tips may include applying the Pomodoro technique, for example, 25 minutes of focus followed by a 5-minute break, or disable deactivating notifications from their devices. So I think the most important message is to make them feel part of the solution and also make them realize that it is not cool to let the technology manage you. It should be the other way around. They should manage the technology.
Yes. Look, just as we approach closing, I just want to bring Lon in here for a last remark before we go to some closing statements. Lon, so you've heard a lot about digitalization, modernizing the education institutions. I know you teach the human story at your college and what it means to be a human being in the 21st century. Naturally, with all this adoption of technology, there is that we can go as far as to call it a threat to one's digital agency. What are your comments on that?
Well, I think that the moment we're in which we are all spending a lot of time at home, often alone with our machines, can give us a chance to really go deeply and understand ourselves as human beings when we turn off the machines. So on one hand, we are needing our machines right now very much. But then there's the moment when, as Sophia says, we must learn how to manage these technologies. Humans have been creating powerful tools since the beginning of civilization 10 to 12,000 years ago on this planet. It's something we do. We have been manipulating things, gaining greater power, creating more complex things. But in the end, we must learn how to turn off those machines and sit quietly and listen to ourselves and become more mindful. And when we do that, we begin to see what great potential we have to take charge and to become part of the solution. So we are now at a time when we have to learn through the growing pains that we're in on how to manage our technologies because they're so essential. And one thing we have to learn is when we don't need those technologies. And that's when we turn them off and we become mindful and we go more deep and we begin to see what our imaginations are capable of, what our perseverance is capable of, what we human beings are capable of. This to me is a source of great power and hope.
It was nicely articulated, and it's hard to disagree with anything you just said there. Any closing remarks from you, Andras, and then Sophia before we start closing up?
There is an increasing fear of artificial intelligence. Whether we like it or not, this is going to be even more widespread in the coming decades. That is exactly the reason why we need to have an educated public in that regard. Otherwise, societies could be manipulated, and we end up, absolutely, and they already are, and we end up with a Big Brother is watching you.
Yeah.
So that I think ought to be a new, perhaps, direction in digital learning. We can, well, perhaps I'm an old guy, but I think a person-to-person relation between the teacher and the students is indispensable, because whatever fancy artificial intelligence you have, that cannot tell you the ethical, well, it can, just rules and some legal stuff, but the cultural considerations, the ethical considerations, the need for inclusiveness, issues of diversity. A teacher is, at least I was so lucky to have a couple of outstanding ones who were role models. And I early on, more than 50 years ago, I started to be digital, when which was considered as a funny hobby at the time. But I could have never done that without my teachers at the university, who from early on tried to inject into me that apart from digital literacy, a digital ethic is very important. Because if not, then we could be manipulated.
Absolutely.
And that's bad.
For sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Andras. Any closing remarks from you, Sophia?
Yeah, I want to say where I started from when I said that we should try to not go back to how things were before COVID-19, but we should try to go forward. And I'm not talking only about technology and about online learning here, but also about these literacies, digital literacies, and other transferable skills. We need more self-directed learning, more learning how to learn. So I want to close on a positive note. The lockdown gave us the opportunity to understand the amazing things that we can do as a community, and I'm talking as an educator here. when we step out of our comfort zones, and it also made us realize that there are issues in our current system. So I think that this is a great opportunity to use this experience, to use what we've learned, and we are learning still, to move forward, not backward.
Yes, and that's a lovely note to end this webinar on. There's so much we could talk about, and we have noted all your comments, and we will be putting together an entire webinar series where we can then explore them each in depth and really try to unpack what the challenges are. So yes, to sum up, we've tried to unpack the transition and how universities adapted, what are some of the challenges there from the teacher's perspective, as well as the students having to grapple with their new realities. We then tried to shift the conversation so that we could see what we can expect to see going forward. So Sophia was right to point out that we should expect 100% online learning environment. But that does not have to be as chaotic, if I can use that word loosely, with the emergency remote learning. There is things that we can do today to better prepare ourselves for the next academic year or semester. It is a joint responsibility, and everyone has a role to play, including students themselves. They also can prepare themselves to make the most out of their online learning experience. So on that note, I will say thank you to our speakers today, coming from all parts of the globe, Sophia, Andras, and Lon.
Thank you.
It's been a privilege
Thank you.
having you guys here. I will encourage everybody to visit our website and follow our Facebook page, as you can be informed with the next upcoming webinars. And yes, as I mentioned, we took notes of some of the questions and comments that we could not get to. But yes, rest assured, we will be exploring those down the line. So on that note, thank you on behalf of the Global Institute for Lifelong Empowerment, and I hope you all have a fantastic day and week and summer ahead. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.